We are going to the moon, and this time we are going to stay. That is the plan set out by the US government, NASA, and dozens of their international and commercial partners. And if they manage to stick to that plan, what we are about to witness is much more than simply landing people on the moon. Landing isn't easy, but it's also not the hardest part. We've done it before, but what comes next is something completely new. We need to build on the moon. We need to build a permanent base, essentially a small city, on an alien world, and no one is entirely sure how it will turn out. But we do have incredibly practical and innovative solutions for life beyond Earth. First, we need to talk about where this lunar base will be located. The moon is a big place, and all previous human landings have occurred right around the center, in a nice, flat, safe spot that made direct radio communication with Earth very easy. But that was in the 1960s, and this time, when we return to the moon, we are targeting a much more interesting place, the lunar South Pole. This region is full of impact craters, mountain ranges, and ancient volcanoes. Some of the low valleys and crater floors are in permanent shadow. The ground hasn't seen sunlight in millions or even billions of years and is likely full of water ice delivered to the inner solar system by asteroids and comets. NASA has identified 13 potential landing sites for the Artemis program. Most of them are small patches of sunlight around crater rims or tops of small mountains surrounded by deep shadows and rugged terrain. This will be an incredibly fascinating region for scientific discovery, but equally dangerous for the people who need to live and work on the moon for weeks and months at a time. So this will require infrastructure like never before. All the fundamental elements of a city on Earth must be recreated in the most hostile environment, with the most limited resources. So where do we start? With roads. Yes. Wherever we are going, we need roads and landing pads and other solid surfaces to operate and build. The problem that must be solved is the dust. The lunar surface is covered with a relatively thin but incredibly light and fluffy layer of ultrafine dust. Every grain of this lunar sand is sharp and abrasive like broken glass. During the Apollo missions, it was known to cut the outer layers of spacesuits and scratch the visors of astronauts' helmets. And the dust sticks. Dust accumulation on the lunar rover caused it to overheat by clogging the radiator. The trick is that without an atmosphere and with very little gravity, once you lift dust, it can travel far. When Apollo 12 landed on the moon, they tried to land as close as possible to a probe called Surveyor 3, which had landed on the moon a few years earlier. NASA wanted the astronauts to inspect it, and what they found was that although the Apollo spacecraft had landed 180 meters away, Surveyor had been sandblasted by the dust kicked up by the lander engines. So if we are going to build a lunar base where people are constantly landing, taking off, driving vehicles, and walking around, we need to eliminate as much dust as possible from our lives. That means roads, landing pads, and hardened surfaces around the base camp. A quick and simple short-term solution could be rhino snot. That's the nickname the US military gives to a spray-on product used to stabilize dirt roads and helicopter landing zones in field operations. It was popular in Afghanistan because it turned desert sand into solid material. They found it particularly useful for eliminating dust clouds created by helicopter takeoffs and landings. So that's a potential short-term solution, but it's not ideal because we would have to transport all that rhino snot from Earth, and would essentially be polluting the moon with microplastics. So a more sustainable answer that could truly scale to building a small city on the moon would be simply melting the surface and turning it into solid glass. This is something the European Space Agency is working on right now with an experiment called PAVER. Scientists have been using simulated lunar dust and a powerful laser to experiment with melting the dust and forming a glass-like solid surface. This is an idea that, in a way, dates back to 1933, when people imagined we could pave Earth's deserts simply by melting the sand. It sounds logical. Glass is just melted sand. The idea was completely impractical for Earth at the time, but on a future lunar base, it might be our best option. Now, we probably don't need to bring a giant laser to the moon. Instead, We could install a giant magnifying lens to concentrate sunlight, specifically using something called a Fresnel lens, which focuses light using grooves carved into a flat piece of transparent plastic, eliminating the need for a large curved glass lens. A Fresnel lens would only need to be a little under 2.5 meters wide. But given the geography of the lunar South Pole, where the sun is low on the horizon and shadows are long, we might still need the laser. Either way, the process will be slow. The Europeans working on the PAVER experiment estimate that we could create a 100 square meters landing pad, 2 centimeters thick, in 115 days. That's about 100 times slower than paving roads with traditional asphalt, so it's a huge job, but we are going to spend a lot of time driving on the moon. Our main transportation will be pressurized vehicles like this rover developed by the Japanese space program in partnership with Toyota, also known as the Lunar Cruiser. Rovers like this will be how we move around the lunar base without constantly putting on or taking off spacesuits. You go directly from your pressurized habitat to your pressurized rover, and then to the next building. This is also how we'll explore the deeper wild terrain. The Lunar Cruiser is essentially an RV for the moon. It can sustain 2 astronauts on a trip of up to 30 days or more and would run on a hydrogen fuel cell. Now, having an RV is great, but where do we live? Well, we need to divide that into short-term and long-term housing. Building a lunar base won't happen overnight, and NASA has already designed our first lunar home. They call it the Foundation Surface Habitat. It's a 3-story structure combining a metal frame with an inflatable module, and it can accommodate up to 4 people for around 1 month. Although the Foundation will mainly be occupied by 2 astronauts while the other 2 are out exploring the moon in their pressurized vehicle, the lower level of the Foundation is a metal structure 4 meters in diameter. It contains the airlock and EVA suits, as well as a science station for geological experiments with lunar samples. Astronauts climb a ladder to reach the 2nd level in the inflatable module, which expands to 6.5 meters in diameter. Here is where we find hygiene and exercise equipment. There is also a biology lab where astronauts will study the effects of the lunar environment on plants and animals. Moving up to the 3rd level, we reach the main crew living space. There are beds, a medical station, a kitchen, and a computer workstation. There is also a human research lab where the astronauts themselves become study subjects to understand how long-term lunar stays affect the human body. Once we get past the Foundation stage, we need to start building permanent structures on the moon, something that provides higher levels of protection and safety. We need to shield ourselves from dangerous cosmic radiation, mitigate extreme temperature swings between lunar day and night, and protect against micrometeorite impacts. To do this, we go back to the origins of human architecture. We build with bricks. In the same way scientists believe we can melt lunar surface material to make glass roads. They also believe we can bake lunar dust into structural bricks. The idea is to continue using something like an inflatable habitat or even a solid metal structure, but then encase it in a layer of bricks. This should mitigate most radiation and micrometeorite hazards and provide an insulating layer that makes heating and cooling the habitat more efficient. China has already begun testing its own lunar bricks. Their concept is to build an egg-shaped structure called the moon pod vessel. Robots would handle construction, combining traditional Chinese bricklaying techniques with 3D printing using lunar soil. In 2024, China began an experiment to create bricks from 5 different compositions of simulated lunar soil and tested 3 different heating methods to melt the soil into solid rock. Then, in November, they transported these bricks to the Tiangong space station, where they were placed on an external experiment platform. The bricks will spend the next 3 years exposed to vacuum, cosmic rays, and large temperature swings to test how well they hold up. There's also this incredible concept that combines glass melting and habitat construction into a giant spherical lunar structure. It looks totally crazy, but a US company called Skyports received funding from NASA's Institute for Advanced Concepts to develop the idea. It's basically large-scale glass blowing. They heat lunar dust into molten material and then use compressed